Now, just a little warning before we begin, there will be major spoilers in this video for the 4th episode of Andor, so if you haven't seen it yet and you don't want anything ruined, it is a really good time to click away. Okay, so after last week's 3-episode premiere, the two biggest complaints I heard or saw were that it was too slow and that it just didn't feel like Star Wars. And after this latest episode, which I personally enjoyed, I think there's still going to be a lot of people, a lot of fans saying, this is too slow and it doesn't feel like Star Wars. And I won't necessarily try to disagree with that complaint about it being slow. This was very much another setup type episode that was 100% all character interaction and nothing else. However, we do know or have been told by Tony Gilroy that we're basically going to get 4 3-episode story arcs in this first season, and they will span 1 year of the story, thus making this episode the opening act or the setup part of a new arc. And though that in itself is not an excuse for perhaps a slow episode, and I get that not everyone is going to enjoy this kind of approach, especially when it leads to episodes completely devoid of any and all action like this one was, because for better or worse, most fans do indeed expect plenty of action out of Star Wars. I don't think anyone's going to deny that's kind of been a hallmark of Star Wars since, well, as long as it's existed. So being disappointed in not getting any action is certainly understandable and justifiable. All that said, I personally really enjoy when characters get time and room to grow, when writers trust in themselves and in the audience to take the time to build a story with actual, understood, and genuinely felt stakes, because we've come to know and care about or hate the characters involved, that you don't need action every 5 minutes just to keep people vested. I love when a story truly does feel character-driven, that the decisions of the characters are what is moving the plot, not when it feels like they're just being dragged around by that plot, which makes the story, of course, feel contrived. And so far, I feel like this series is doing a fantastic job of starting out small, starting with one man's really bad day, mainly brought on by the decision of a couple security officers who felt like they had been slighted at a brothel, and that it's adding more and more characters to it, that we're constantly building up to something much bigger than where we started. And one of those new characters, not that she's a new character, but new to the story, is Mon Mothma, who is, of course, a founding member of the Rebel Alliance and will eventually one day go on to become its leader. And we learn that after 14 years of the Empire, the walls are sort of closing in around her, that it's getting harder and harder for her to operate, to move money around and do whatever else it is she's been doing for the rebellion, that spies for the Empire are everywhere from within the Senate itself all the way down to her new driver keeping an eye on her. And I loved the scene between her and Luthen Rael, who has become my favorite character in the series thus far. And it turns out he is some kind of artifacts or antiquities dealer or broker. And I'm not sure why or how that's put him at odds with the Empire. Perhaps they have interfered with his business, or maybe confiscated some prized possession of his. Maybe some old Jedi or Sith artifacts he had, holocrons perhaps, something that Palpatine decided to take from him. That could be a really fun motivation for him. Could be interesting if Palpatine taking a Jedi artifact is what leads Luthen to become this crucial member of the early rebellion. There's something very fitting about that, I think. And right now, Luthen does feel like an extremely vital member of this early rebellion, like a sort of bridge between the macro side of it, the big players who have the money and the power in the Senate, for whatever power in the Senate is worth these days, and the more micro side of it, those down on the ground and actually running the missions. He's the one, or will be the one, that gets these two sides together and on the same page eventually, I figure. And I do think the idea that he may have had something taken by Palpatine, something he cherished, makes sense considering how highly he valued the Quadi Signet or the blue kyber crystal that we saw, the one he gives to Cassian, though he wants it back, saying it's always going to be worth more to him than the 50k credits Cassian could sell it for. Again, it really shows how kind of interested in the past and history he is, so he may have, again, had something cool that Palpatine took, and that has brought him into the fight. And just let me now take a moment to say how cool it was to get a reference to the Rakata Empire in this episode. That was about the last thing I ever expected out of this series. I mean, this is a show that basically said it was going to pride itself on not doing any fan service. And that certainly felt like a pretty big wink and a nod to the fans, though in all reality, one that wasn't blatantly so. The guy deals in extremely valuable artifacts, after all, and I'd imagine something from tens of thousands of years ago from the Empire that ruled the galaxy back then, that it would be highly sought after and a prized item by whoever possessed it. Either way, the scene between him and Mon Mothma was terrific. I love that he dropped the little act of this kind of fun and eccentric salesman as soon as they were in the back room, and he became his real self again, the one who is all for the cause. I also wonder what's the deal between Mon Mothma and her husband. There is certainly a level of animosity or dysfunction in their marriage, and I'm going to guess it's because her husband is a for the Empire guy, that he drank the Kool-Aid or just doesn't care about what is really going on. Likely, I think he still has connections within the military after saying his old regimental mate is now a governor, and I'm assuming he fought in the Clone Wars. And she's not thrilled about that, thrilled that he's all for the Empire while she is secretly trying to undermine it. I'm also going to assume there will come a point when he finds out what she's really up to, and that will lead to some interesting decisions for both of them, to a confrontation, no doubt. We also heard Mon Mothma mention that she wants to bring someone new into the circle, and my mind immediately went to Bail Organa, though you'd think they would already be working together on some level, though maybe he's just not in the circle with Luthen yet. You would think, though, that they would have been together from the start and they would be kind of a package deal, or maybe they're not. Maybe they don't know that each other is kind of forming a bit of their own rebellion, and they'll eventually figure it out and then merge together. Another new character we got in this episode was then Lieutenant Deidre Miro of the ISB, as well as her superior officer, Major Partagaz, and what seems to be kind of her rival, that being Lieutenant Blevin. And this is then, of course, our first look at the actual Empire in this series, after the first 3 episodes only dealt with a local corporate security force and the way they handled a murder investigation, which I really liked. I thought it was a good idea to show the Empire being kind of above local law enforcement matters, to be this larger looming threat that kind of just watched over them. Anyway, in those first 3 episodes, we saw how Cassian murdering 2 security officers led to another young and by-the-book officer taking it upon himself, against the wishes of his superior, to track down the killer and to eventually attempt to apprehend Andor with a small team. And when they try to do that, a couple of them end up getting killed, and thus they end up on the radar of the Empire, and they then come in, the Empire comes in and basically fires all of them and says, we'll take over from here. And now Deidre, this ISB officer, wants to further investigate the matter because she believes she's seeing a pattern that an organized rebellion is potentially forming, which it, of course, is. Problem is, no one wants to believe her, or they think she's simply trying to further her own career, or that she's basically stepping out of bounds and should just do the job she's been asked to do. Which is exactly what I predicted would be the case with this character, that she was putting it together in regards to the rebellion, while others around her or above her were ignoring or overlooking it, or they were ignoring her because of where she comes from. And yeah, we heard a lot from this actress before the series started about how her character wasn't going to be taken seriously because she's a woman, but turns out that was probably just her interpretation of it, her motivation for the character, because in this episode we learn she's not liked or taken seriously by some of the others, that she has a lot to overcome, as her superior says, because she's from enforcement, that some probably don't think she belongs in this position or line of work because of where she started out, not because she's a woman. And no matter how you want to interpret all of this with her, it's already showing us the flaws in the Empire. It's giving us a look at how short-sighted they can be, and also how bloated this organization is, and it's filled with pompous and petty individuals who don't work together for any kind of common cause, or that don't trust each other, that they're more worried about their own selfish agendas, about their careers, and advancing in the ranks. Because if Blevin doesn't shut her down or block her investigation, if he decided to work with her instead, maybe they put it all together and start to unravel the early threads of the rebellion. They might just snuff out that spark before it catches fire across the galaxy. And speaking of that, I would really kind of like to see Ezra's message in this series, the one he sends out in Rebels. Either way, the Empire, this somewhat dysfunctional bureaucracy of selfish individuals who work together only in name, is then contrasted nicely in this episode against Vel and her small band of rebels, who all have a common cause that they put above everything else, and that they must trust each other and work together if they're ever going to accomplish anything. Which is then why they are so skeptical of Cassian, because they have to put their lives in the hands of this stranger, and it's a stranger that they don't know is here for the money, as they plan to steal an Imperial payroll from a weapons depot. And I'm going to guess that not all of them are going to make it out of this mission alive, and that them giving their life to the cause is going to begin to open Cassian's eyes a bit as to what's really going on, what's really worth fighting for. And overall, I will say that everything with these rebels was, a bit slow and maybe a tad redundant. It was the weakest part of the episode for me, and boiled down to repeatedly talking about how they don't like this sprung upon them, and they don't want to trust him but have to because Vel says so. And like I was saying, yes, it does a great job of showing the difficulties of their side, especially contrasted against the Empire, that not only are they fighting against a superior opponent, but you do have to find people willing to risk it all to fight that opponent, and to be able to trust them with your very life. The other small story thread we got in this episode was seeing Cyril Karn going home to his mother, and though we didn't get a single word from him in the episode, considering his mother slapped him and then hugged him after showing up at his door, I think it's safe to say these two are going to have a interesting mother and son relationship. Though I think it's only a matter of time until Dedra seeks him out in order to learn more about what happened on Ferrix, and then he starts working for her. Really seems like those two would hit it off for some reason. Moving on then to just one final thing before wrapping this up, I have to say I loved going back to Coruscant. I thought it looked fantastic, and I hope we do see more of the planet, that we go to more places on it, maybe a glimpse at the Imperial Palace perhaps. And going along with this, just all around, I think the show looks fantastic. I always see people commenting about or wondering, why does this look so good? Why did they seemingly spend so much money on this when it feels like kind of skimped out on Kenobi and Boba Fett? And I think the easy answer is they felt like they had to go the distance with this show, that they had to do something special visually to get people watching and then to keep them watching until things really ramped up and got exciting. And with Kenobi and Boba Fett, they figured people would just watch it for the characters no matter what. However, the funny part is, even though, like I just said, it does look great, it's the characters that are keeping me around in this case, and what I find so disappointing with the other shows. And again, I know some probably found this episode too slow. Some will be upset there was not a single shred of action in an episode of a Star Wars show. But you can see the build-up here. You can see the pieces on the board and how one move by one side is or will lead to a move by the other side. A good character-driven story is like watching a well-played game of chess by both sides, and one of the biggest flaws of a lot of Star Wars, if we're being honest, is the bad guys tend to suck or do stupid things, which leads to the good guys winning more by default than anything they actually accomplished. And I'm really thinking and hoping that won't be the case here, that we'll see the Empire making the moves that truly put our heroes in rough or impossible spots, and ones they don't always get out of. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of the latest episode of Andor, and as usual, I will be doing a follow-up video, one where I read comments and respond to them over in a Let's Talk Some Andor video on my second channel. So if you want to check that out, go ahead and subscribe to that channel. I'll put a little thing here so you can do that. Whatever the case may be, leave your comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.